In July of 2012, about a week after I had to put down the dog I had inherited, I found myself in New York City. Putting Thomas down was devastating. I knew it would be painful, but I was genuinely taken aback by how overwrought I felt. How long I had to sit afterwards in the vet's waiting area, unable to drive for crying. How guilty I felt. A couple days later, for no particular reason, I decided to spend the weekend in New York City. For the months previous, I'd been getting up early. Thomas's esophagus had collapsed, meaning he had to be put into this homemade doggy high chair and slowly fed by hand each morning. I'd get up 4:30-ish. So when it came to booking my flight to New York, I stuck to my existing schedule and booked one for very early in the day. Now, New York is known as the city that never sleeps, but I'm pretty sure they're mostly asleep all morning. I was at my hotel by 9 a.m., but the room would not be ready until 3 p.m. After altogether too much walking around a notably groggy Manhattan, I bought a single overpriced ticket for a matinee performance of the Book of Mormon. Quick review: theater reviewers would have been much less impressed if they'd stayed home a little more often and watched some South Park. Afterwards, a long walk and a short dinner had me in bed by 8. Although I was in New York, my schedule was distinctly provincial. The next morning, I decided to go to the MoMA, the Guggenheim, and the Whitney. Something about grief and art, I think. Again, I was up altogether too early, used the empty hotel gym, and ate in the empty hotel dining room. They charged way too much for an unremarkable breakfast because, well, all hotels charge way too much for unremarkable breakfasts. A fact I seem incapable of remembering before breakfast. I was at the MoMA by 9 a.m. The MoMA does not open at 9 a.m. The MoMA's bookstore, it turns out, does. I can't tell you why I picked up Kit White's 101 Things to Learn in Art School. I was not about to attend art school, and I have a pretty strong aversion to lists, bulleted more than numbered, but still. But I did pick it up, and I ended up reading the entire thing standing in an aisle at the MoMA bookstore. I bought the copy I'd read as well as a couple other books. I don't remember what the other books were, save for heavy. Quick travel tip: when planning to tour galleries, buying heavy books early in the day is kind of dumb. The galleries were pleasant and enjoyable, but mostly uneventful. Throughout the day, I kept returning to Kit White's book. Early in the evening, as the city began to rouse, I found myself back at the now bustling hotel and heading for bed. I had spent all day looking through galleries and reflecting on these 101 lessons, but many of the lessons I found not necessarily difficult to understand, but really very hard to accept. I didn't know enough to be able to say they were wrong, but also didn't know how they could be right. Of course, say something is one of those lessons, number 36. And although it was not the most challenging of notions, neither was it as obvious as it now seems. But the first one I had a lot of trouble with was this. Number 10, art is not self-expression. It is the self-expressing all the elements of the culture that has shaped it. We filter the ambient information that surrounds us, from our families, from our communities, from the information that bombards us every day, from myriad sources. We do not create this information. It helps to create us. We, in turn, start to interpret it and describe it to ourselves and others as a means to understand it. This is the art impulse. Even works of pure imagination have sources outside of ourselves. Know your sources. I'll be frank, this idea kind of terrified me. It flew in the face of anything I thought I knew about art and everything I did know about presentations. In art, I thought, a masterwork painting was the work of a master painter expressing themselves. In presentations, a good presentation was the result of an intelligent and authentic presenter delivering content chosen to demonstrate that they possess those qualities. Presentations would never have been called art, but it was commonplace to talk about the art of presenting. The art belonged to the presenter, not the presentation. When making slides for presentations, it was important to ensure that the art did not get in the way or obfuscate either the science or the presenter. Slides could be dense and unpleasant, but that's fine, because nothing says serious scientists better than a good anti-aesthetic. Slides should never appear too artistic, because it could be perceived as the presenter hiding bad science behind pretty slides. Art, other than the art of presenting, was often seen as antithetical to serious scholarly work. 2012 was also the height of the TED Talk, the pinnacle of the celebrity intellectual gracing us through artistic presentation to a glimpse of their glorious acumen. These were the masters of their field, and their talks were considered good when the audience could see them. It wasn't that presentations had an element of self-expression or self-promotion. It was that presentations were considered to be the art of professional self-expression. So this suggestion that art is not self-expression put more than a bit of a wrinkle in this, because if that was true, when presenters present themselves first, when they make it about who they are, then they make it more like what art is not. To make it more like art, number 10 suggests they would need to regard themselves as simply interpreters of information, driven by the desire to describe it to themselves and others as a means to understand it. That is what would make the presentation, according to Kit White's explanation, more akin to art. To me, the fascinating part of this is the degree to which it would make presentations more akin to scholarship and science. Science is not self-expression. I'm not sure that's ever needed to be said. It's a pretty common understanding that science is systematic inquiry. The desire to do science is the desire to interpret and describe a phenomenon to ourselves and to others as a means to understand it. To accept that art is this as well is to see art and science as complementary forms of inquiry, as parallel forms of description. This suggests that we can make scientific and scholarly communication truer to its science by presenting it more like art. It also suggests that reconciling art and science was never the real challenge for presenting. The focus on self-expression has been the real issue for scientific presentations, moving them away from both science and art. As the sun went down, New York woke up and I got sleepy. I wanted to keep exploring this and the other 100 lessons, but the day had been long and the bed was comfy. I got ready for bed, felt sad about Thomas, and slept well until 4:30-ish. The next morning, about a block from my hotel, I found a restaurant where I could get a cheap and abundant breakfast. In a booth surrounded by red wallpaper with gold trim and black and white autographed headshots of celebrity patrons, I enjoyed both my breakfast and the triumph of having learned the lesson of eating breakfast away from the hotel. Buoyed by my ability to learn, I decided to tackle another challenging lesson about art. Number 60, information is a medium. Though ephemeral and without the materiality of oil paint, a silver gelatin print, or a hunk of clay, information must now be considered the stuff of which art can be constructed. Until it is harnessed to an agenda, analyzed, and used to make a coherent description, however, it is just data. Think of information as a brushstroke that is used to make a larger image. Unlike physical media, information is perishable and becomes dated. It should be used, therefore, like all media, to embody the metaphorical. One of the initial things that struck me about this was how literally it addressed the presentation of scientific information. This required no translation or interpretation. This was about information design, and what it highlighted was that we weren't just doing it wrong, we were doing it backwards. Scientific presentations tend to use metaphors to help audiences understand data. This lesson suggests that scientific presentations would be better if instead they use data to help audiences understand a metaphor. The purpose of a scientific presentation should be to help us understand something we could not understand without the benefit of science. We do not need data to understand the concrete, the material, or the observable. We don't need data to be inspired or impressed. We need data to see the invisible, to witness that which is too large or too small, that which is obscured or confounded. We need to know what is being abstracted before we can understand what the data are showing us. Abstractions and metaphors give the data in our presentation purpose. They give our presentations purpose. Too often presentations simply exist to exist, as pure obligation. They are part of the dissemination phase of research, or the end of a project, or the summation to a report that no one read. These presentations with a perfunctory purpose are hollow outlines, empty simulacra. For a presentation to have value, it has to be more than this. It has to say something. Number 36, don't just make design, say something. Pleasing design alone does not make interesting art. Design is only the first step in making something substantive and convincing. To succeed, an image must lead to something beyond the mechanics of formal arrangement. It must be integral to a larger discussion about the world in which it was created and the history of its own form. Meaningful, abstract images, which are most closely associated with pure design, speak to the issues of their time and the history and future of their form. From the moment I read this, I knew I could not do the work I do without this becoming a central tenet of it. Don't just talk, say something. What also struck me is how well this supports number 10. Saying something is as much about moving beyond self-expression as it is about being purposeful. Bad presentations say a bunch of things, often about the presenter or their work. Good presentations say something. We can make a presentation slides beautiful. We can train the presenter to be commanding, passionate, and relaxed. We can fill the presentation with inspiring moments and revolutionary findings, and it won't make a lick of difference if the presenter doesn't know what they're trying to say. I've presented to scientists and scholars many times about the lessons in this book, each time highlighting different lessons, but I find it impossible to talk about presentations without referring to number 36. Say something. I don't imagine I will ever know how much my emotional rawness contributed to the impact Kit White's book had on me. I've read it enough times since that those initial experiences exist as a kind of mythology. I have fond memories of Thomas before he got sick, and that grief-motivated trip to Manhattan was a thing that happened. But it's that little book bought in the MoMA bookstore that has become the point of the story. The 101 Things to Learn in Art School is still very much an essential part of my work, and every time I read it, I'm grateful I stumbled upon it. Thanks for watching. I should note that I'm in no way affiliated with Kit White or the MIT Press, and receive no financial or other incentives. That said, buy this book.